DaVinci Resolve is the industry standard tool for color grading video content, and I'm not exaggerating that. And you can get it for free right now, no gimmicks, full access. But being an industry focused tool, it does mean that there is a lot that you need to know before you can jump in the deep end. But jumping in the deep end when you don't know how to swim is never a recommended choice, so let me provide you with a pair of floaties to set you on your way. This quick start guide to color grading in DaVinci Resolve is designed to tell you everything that you need to know to get started color correcting and grading in Resolve without bogging you down with any of the more advanced tools that are, although important, they're not really helpful with where you're at on your journey right now. What you'll walk away with will be a great understanding of the layout of Resolve in general, but more specifically the color tab. We'll build your confidence in navigating the program and navigating a basic color grading workflow, and we'll get you onto a path of learning that will help you when you do decide to dive in deeper later on with those advanced techniques and you can throw out those floaties. So in the interest of speed, let's get paddling. If you've not yet downloaded DaVinci Resolve or you're having some trouble navigating to the free version, just make sure you're on the official Blackmagic Design website, navigate to Products, DaVinci Resolve and Fusion Software, DaVinci Resolve Free, hit Download DaVinci Resolve, then make sure that you're selecting one of the free options. The differentiator is that the paid one is called Studio. I'll be working in the paid Studio version and I'm currently running DaVinci Resolve Studio 19, but some of the tools I'll show you in this video are available in the free version as well as DVR 18 or even 17, I think. If you're brand new, just give 19 a go. So go ahead and install it. We'll skip that because of, speed. When you first open up Resolve, it'll prompt you to create a project library. Call that whatever you want. Again, once you're using the program a little more heavily, you can dive into the weeds of the various project database settings. Once you have created a database and have the option to create a new project, do so. Now we're in Resolve. If you've never seen it before, the basics that you need to know is that the tab at the bottom is your navigation bar between the various workspaces in Resolve. These workspaces are roughly linear in terms of a typical project workflow and go from left to right in this fashion. Starting with the media page, this is where Resolve wants you to begin, and this is a great workspace for organizing your rushes and assets for a project, especially if it's large and complex. You can set a lot of project-wide parameters in this page, as well as the settings menu. This will be more relevant on a holistic project versus a simple grading project, like we're going to look at. Next is the cut page, which is Blackmagic's take on the modern speed editing workflow. Super useful for powering through an edit and getting to a rough cut. The focus on this page here is speed. Following from that, you have the Edit workspace, which is where you'll find more traditional NLE tools, and this page works in conjunction with the cut page. Next, we have the Fusion workspace, which is where you do your VFX compositing and motion graphics. And next we have the color page, which is what we're going to dive into in this video, of course. Then we have Fairlight, which is the audio workspace, and finally the Deliver tab, which is where we set our export parameters and deliver our content, funnily enough. Now that we've zoomed through that, let's dig down deeper into the color page. This video is brought to you by Envato, the unlimited creative subscription. The broadest range of categories, everything that you need to make great videos. Follow the link in the description and start creating now. So the color page is quite simple in its layout, and it's very customizable when it comes to what you want to see on the UI via a set of workspace toggles along this top section. This means if you don't have the luxury of a couple of large monitors for all of this real estate, you can easily toggle things on and off without having to dig too far into different toolbars. It's also as good a place as any to start, so along this top toolbar, you have all of those toggleable spaces I mentioned. Starting from left, you have the gallery. In the gallery, you can store frame grabs from shots that you're working on, and then you can apply those parameters from the frame grab to a new shot. It's super handy. I'll show you that later on in the course. You can also frame wipe the saved frames against a clip you're working on to compare color, luminance, and contrast values by eye and by scope. Next, you have the LUTs section, which is a place where you can quickly navigate through and apply LUTs that you have stored on your machine. Resolve does come with a bunch of correction LUTs for different types of cameras and media types, which is very handy. Next is the media pool. This is the same media pool you have access to in other workspaces in Resolve, like the media cut and edit pages. It's where all of your assets live. Next, you have the clips toggle. This shows and hides the clips in linear order that make up your timeline. I generally hide these when I'm working on a shot, then show them when I'm ready to move on to the next one. Quick export is pretty self-explanatory. It does what it says on the tin. It exports quickly. Timeline is sort of like clips, but without the pictures. Well, actually, when you have clips open, you do get a ton of options on right click, like so, versus the timeline toggle, which is more of an overview as to where the current clip is in the sequence of shots that make up your entire timeline. You can move through them like so. Next up is the nodes section, and this is where you'll build your color grade. I rarely toggle this off, but sometimes it is handy to hide it if you are dialing in some other things. Whilst you're getting used to working with nodes, I'd keep it open, face your fears and all of that. The effect toggle brings open your list of effects that you can bring into your nodes for various effects. Now, the lightbox is a zoomed out overview of all of your clips, where you're up to with those clips, and then a place to access certain options on the clip level. Something I rarely use, but I can definitely see how on a more labor intensive project like long form narrative work, it would be really helpful. Now that's the top toggle toolbar, as I like to call it. In the center here, you have the reference display. This is your image out, so to speak, and it'll change as you begin to tweak your grade. Let's for now have that and our nodes displayed in this center area. Below that, we have our actual toolbar, which houses all of the tools necessary to correct and grade our images. Now again, this is the studio version of Resolve, and a lot of what is here is also going to appear in the free version. But anything that is in the free version that requires a paid studio version will end up being watermarked, so you'll be able to tell really clearly what it affects. I'll leave a couple of handy links below this video to some blog articles that go into great detail about the differences between the two versions if you're interested in that. Alrighty, color grading tools, let's get into it. This is a flying overview from left to right. Camera raw. If you're working with raw files from manufacturers like Arri, Red, Blackmagic, Design, etc., you can control the parameters of that raw footage here and how it comes into your workspace. For instance, you might want some tint, temp, or exposure corrections in the raw file data first before you tackle that in the grading node. For the purposes of this flying beginner overview, we can let the camera raw section rest for now. Color match. If you're working with a physical color checker, which is a little board full of colored squares that you film a shot of on set, you can then match your colors up here and it'll tell Resolve what sort of color space you're working with color-wise and get you pretty much matched up and corrected with a click of a button. Then you can tackle the aesthetic grade in the nodes. Primaries color wheels is next, and this is where we'll do the bulk of our correction and our grading in today's video, and pretty much all of my grading. I'll go into this in a lot more detail shortly. Next, we have HDR color wheels, and I'd be shocked if you were working with HDR content or delivering for HDR on your first couple of outings in Resolve, so we'll breeze by that today. RGB mixer is used to tweak the red, green, and blue values across your image. I find this really useful for adding specific color washes to a corrected image, so to speak. I find it gives a little more control than some of the similar ways to do it over in the primary color wheels, for example. Motion effects is next, and this is where you can do some pretty significant noise reduction on your footage. This is a feature that is limited to the studio version, however, so we'll just sort of leave it for now. Custom curves is next. If you've done any sort of photo manipulation before, you might be familiar with the idea of curves. This is where you can really dial in things like contrast, saturation, and luminance, as well as playing those values off against each other. Next up, we've got Color Slice, which is a brand new tool in Resolve 19, and I believe it is available in the free version as well. I haven't actually really had the chance to put this brand new tool through its paces yet, but it looks pretty promising from what I've seen. But as I understand it, it's a series of preset qualifiers with the ability to tweak things like hue, saturation, and density of colors within your image. A few different ways to do the same thing in Resolve, but this looks like it's a little bit more of a straightforward and just maybe different approach. Then you've got the color warper, and this allows you to warp colors based on the luminance and brightness. When you click the color warper palette, you'll see a web which displays all of the hues and saturations in your image, and if you select one of the dots on this web, it will select that corresponding hue. Then you can drag that to a different area of the web and it will shift from one hue to the other. It's a really intuitive tool for secondary grading. Speaking of secondary grading is basically selecting a specific area of your image to change, and the main tool for that process is the qualifier here. You might want to change the color of a shirt without changing the rest of the image, for example. This section lets you isolate specific parts of your image and gives you a bunch of tools to refine that selection. Now, I'll use the qualifier tool later on in this tutorial to show you how I go about making a skin tone correction. Windows. Now, power windows are similar to the qualifier, but they select things within a set shape. You can also use windows to mask out parts of your image. Let's say you want to use the qualifier on a specific part of the image, but there's too much similarity with some other colors, then you can draw a window around the qualified area, invert it so that the qualifier only looks at that one section, and alternatively, you can just draw a window with the pen tool and use that instead of the qualifier. Again, like I said, a few different ways to do the same thing in Resolve. The tracker lets you automatically track those windows that you've just made, making sure that they follow the part of the image once it starts moving again. You can track forward and backwards from the frame in which you've made the initial window. Magic Mask. If you're familiar with rotoscoping, that's sort of what the Magic Mask is, but for grading. So it's an AI-assisted tool that makes use of the neural engine in Resolve that does an exceptional job of either masking out a person or the features of a person to complete secondary grades on. For instance, if you wanted to separate me from the background here, keep me in color, but send the background into black and white, which we can do really easily. Because this uses the neural engine in Resolve, it is only available in the Studio version. This tool in itself is almost worth the cost of Studio. Blur is pretty self-explanatory. You can add blur and sharpening to your image in this section. The key panel is used to fine-tune your keyed parts of the image that you started in the qualifier tool, for example. In the sizing section, you have some transform controls for the image, but generally all of this will be done over in the edit page. It's not entirely relevant for the color section, I don't think. And 3D, this is where you would have 3D tools. However, I'm not working with 3D. This isn't a 3D workflow right now, so I currently don't have access to those tools, and I highly doubt you'll be jumping into this section as a brand new beginner in DaVinci Resolve. Then you have your keyframe and scopes toggle. We're going to completely skip over keyframing for this video, so we'll keep our scopes up here. Now with those scopes, you have 5 professional scopes to guide your color correction and grading within Resolve. Your parade scope helps you see the strength of each of your color channels and allows you to quickly compare them. Your waveform does basically the same thing as the parade, but it also adds the luminance values depicted in white, and then lays that over the top of one another, allowing for comparison of color and luminance in the same image. The vector scope displays your hue and saturation on a circular graph representative of the color wheel, and it often is used when grading skin tones. You can turn on a specific skin tone indicator as well, and we'll see that in action very shortly once we get into a grade. The histogram is a representation of the image's tone and is a really quick and easy way to see where your highlights and shadows are sitting within the image. Too far to the left and you'll likely be crushing your shadows, too far to the right and your highlights will likely be blown out. Then you have this final scope, which is a word that I always fail to say correctly, and it's pretty advanced for basic color grading, but essentially what it's used to do is to see where your image is sitting within a wider color space, which is really crucial for people who are working in a broadcast setting. Alright, that was the flying overview of the color page, and now you should have a pretty clear view on where everything is and what it does, at least in a nutshell. Now that we've got that foundation, we can move on to a bit of correction and grading over in the node section. So let's build a basic node tree. Now, you know what? I have a sneaking suspicion you might also be interested in: a subscription to Envato, the broadest and most valuable creative asset library. If you're a video creator, then having access to millions of stock videos, photos, music tracks and sound effects, video templates, as well as little things like LUTs, which is very relevant to this video, and super relevant to a creator workflow, well, it's just invaluable. Envato has the broadest range of categories. You get unlimited downloads, the licensing is super straightforward, and it's constantly being added to, like the new 3D category or sounds like search for music. What's not to love? Check out the link in the description below to sign up today. If you're completely unfamiliar with a node-based workflow, it's pretty simple. You start on the left, do stuff in the middle, finish on the right. You can see this green dot down here on the left, that's our footage as is, with no changes. Then we create a node, do a bunch of things in it, and connect it over here to our output, which is what is going to display the changes that we've made in the middle here. You can do an endless amount of changes all in one node if you want, but it is better practice to have multiple nodes for different parts of your correction and grading processes in order to kind of keep track of what's going on and where everything is. So we're going to start with a really basic 3-node structure here. The first 2 will be our correction nodes, and the final one will be our look or our creative grade. Just to add context to this workflow as well, there are 2 parts to color grading. There's color correction, which takes the footage from the camera native format and corrects it to the output color space. So for instance, in our example, we're working with S-Log3 footage from a Sony FX30 camera and correcting it for a Rec. 709 delivery color space. Then there is grading, which is the creative flourish that goes over the top. This is where you get to really define the look, use the tools to get creative, and bring your footage into the world that you're building. You must correct before you can creatively grade, or build a look. But in a manner of speaking, correcting is part of the grading process. Now you can correct in a number of ways, manually, as I'll show you shortly, or via a color managed workflow, which means setting up a project in a way that says, hey, I'm a bunch of S-Log3 footage. Can you just automatically correct me to Rec. 709? Please, thanks. or at a node level with something called a CST or a color space transform, which is basically the same thing, and you can see it here. It gives me a bunch of options to manually tell Resolve what format to put my media in and what my desired output color space is, but at a node level rather than a project level. The reason why you would do this at a node level is if you have a bunch of different mixed media from various cameras. But you can also set that up in the color managed workflows. Again, we're getting a little bit too deep into this for a beginner quick start guide, so we'll move on. I think as a beginner, it is important to know how to do it manually, so I'll show you that process. But by all means, if you do want to move through your journey with color grading and start looking into those options, please do. And if you want me to create a more in-depth course on color space transforms or color managed workflows, let me know down in the comments. I'd be more than happy to help. So, onto the manual way. Over in our node tree, I want you to create 3 serial nodes. You can either right click and add a serial node or hit Option plus S on your keyboard. On the left hand node, I want you to right click and select node label or hit Control plus L. Call this one levels. The middle node will be balance and the right one will be look. Now down here, I want you to open up the primaries color wheels, and on the right in our scopes, let's make sure that our RGB parade is the one that is showing. With the levels node selected, we're going to use our lift, gamma, and gain wheels to add contrast to the image and adjust the luminance levels. Lift is your shadows, gamma is your midtones, gain is your highlights. We'll pull the lift down and we'll make sure that we're not clipping it through the floor over on our scopes. And we'll pull the gain up, again, keeping an eye on our scopes to make sure that we're not clipping through the top. Then we'll use the gamma wheel to find a nice point for our midtones to sit. Then we'll just kind of tweak all 3 to find a place that looks visually pleasing, as well as abiding by our scopes, of course. The offset adjusts all 3 simultaneously, and you use this to kind of bump it either way depending on your needs. Staying in the levels node and sticking with the primaries color wheels, we're going to introduce some contrast, and I'll play with the highlights and shadows down in these sliders at the bottom versus the primaries wheels. The pivot over here can be used to sort of shift from one end of the spectrum to the other when it comes to our contrast adjustments, so use the 2 in conjunction, add a little bit of contrast, and then pivot it to shift. Okay, that's fine for now. We might come back to it and change the level shortly after we've introduced some color. So to do that, let's select our balance node. And this is where we will work on the color of our image. First up, let's actually introduce some saturation as we're still sitting quite flat from our original log footage. We can also shift our white balance here as well, over in the temperature and tint sliders. Left for cooler, right for warmer on the temp, and then on the tint, you can adjust your green and magenta shifts. You can use your scopes to get an idea of where your color is sitting too. We've obviously got a bit more blue in this image in my shirt, the microphone, and the painting in the background, so that makes sense as to why we're seeing a bit more blue or why the blue's sitting higher in our scopes. But if we didn't have that much blue in our image, that might indicate to us a color imbalance. Now at any time with our node or multiple nodes selected, we can use Command plus D to bypass the node and check our work. I use this all the time. I'm just going to go back to my levels node now and adjust it all a little bit now that we do have some color in the image, just to kind of make that contrast sit with the color. Okay, moving on to the look. In this node, we can add our creative grade. We can do this in the primaries wheels if we wanted to. We can have a stylized teal and orange look, for example, by pushing the shadows towards teal and the highlights up around orange, midtones around orange as well. Or we could play with some of our inbuilt effects within Resolve. So let's reset that node by right-clicking on it and selecting Reset Node Grade. Then we'll open up our effects section. I like playing with the film look creator as it offers a bunch of different options as well as some great presets to start with. And simply by dropping that on our node, we have a really different and interesting look. And it looks so good because we've taken the time to properly balance our footage in the first 2 nodes. Again, you can either do that manually like we have, or via the color space transform or color managed workflow that I mentioned earlier. So that's one shot in our project, but how do we grade the rest of them? Well, you can go through and do this manually for each shot, and there definitely would be times when you do need to do that, but more often than not, you're going to have a similar shot, or in this case, the exact same shot throughout, and it's just split up because of the edit. So how can you copy that grade? Well, there's a couple of ways. You can either select all of your nodes, copy them with Command C, then bring up your clips like so, and select one or many of them, holding Command plus click to select multiple, and then just hit Command plus V to paste them. Or the more sophisticated way to do this is to right-click on the image and select Grab Still. Now that still will appear up in the gallery. You can label it, so for instance, I'll call this one Cinematic as we put the film look creator on it, and I'll save the other one as Standard. Now we can go through and select our clips like so, then mouse over those stills to audition the grade on them and right-click Apply Grade to apply the look that we've created. And that will also bring over all of our established node tree as well, and then if you need to, you can make specific tweaks per shot. Simple. So one other quick thing I think would be worth looking at for this introduction to color grading is working with skin tones, as more often than not you'll be grading human-based footage and will need to make some secondary adjustments to those areas of your image. It's the first thing that we look at as audience members. Now, as we discovered earlier, when we look through all of the tools available, there are plenty of ways to isolate part of the image to perform your secondary grades on. For this, we're going to use the qualifier. Going back to our shot that has our film look grade on it, we'll create another node after the balance node, and this is because it's going to give you a better qualifier result when you're keying on skin that already has a bit of contrast and color in the image versus our S-Log footage. And also before we add our look effects on the end. So that's going to manipulate the footage away from our original state. So we do the skin tone sort of right in the middle after we've got a bit of contrast on it, but before we've got effects on it. So selecting our balance node and hitting Option+S, then we'll right click, select label node, and we'll label that one skin. And then for the time being, I'm going to turn off our look node so that my machine isn't trying to process those effects while we're trying to pull the key. Then down here, I'll select the qualifier and make a selection in our image. So I'm going to select my skin. Now it looks like nothing has happened, but you can see over in our skin node, something has in fact happened. To see this, you need to click this little button up here, and this will show you the key. In older versions of Resolve, that button will look like a little magic wand, and it will still be in a similar location, I think. Now I'll just use some of the tools available to me down here to clean up this key, and I like to do it in the HSL sliders. You don't need to be too pixel perfect in this area, as we're not really making wild adjustments to this part of the image. Let's open our vector scope down here, and I'll make sure that our skin tone indicator is on, and I'll also zoom in on the image. You can see here our skin tone is sitting just a little to the right of the line, which means we're looking a little bit red in terms of our skin. As a note too on the skin tone indicator, it's indicative for all skin types, tones, colors, and kinds. There is intrinsically a lot of reds in the highlights and blues in the shadows of all skin types, no matter the pigmentation of that skin. So the skin tone indicator isn't just for Caucasian skin, it will work for everyone. We don't need this to be perfectly on the line, it is an indicator after all, but closer to this line the better. So we'll go back to our primaries color wheels and make that adjustment, turning off our selection and then bypassing the node a few times just to kind of see the difference that we've made and making sure we're not pushing it too far. And then let's switch our effects node back on and we'll make some more adjustments with that in mind because we want to see holistically what it will look like with all of our nodes turned on. You, my friend, now know how to do a color correction, a primaries grade, and a secondary skin tone adjustment, as well as how to work with effects, nodes, scopes, and all of that in DaVinci Resolve, which is an industry standard color grading program. I'm very proud of you. And that is just the tip of the iceberg, working with only one shot. Imagine how much more there is to learn and how much fun it is to tinker with this. So it's fun, it's endless, it's a delightful rabbit hole, and you can lose yourself in it for days, weeks, months, years in many cases. So do let me know down in the comments if you thought this tutorial was helpful as a stone cold beginner and what else you might want to learn in DaVinci Resolve when it comes to color grading. I'm all ears, I'd love to talk more about this workflow, so hit me up in the comments, we'll keep the conversation going. Also, don't forget to check out Envato for all of your video creation needs, and until next time, keep your levels balanced, your colors sharp, and your skin tones on the line. Happy color grading.